Okay, well, I'm 50 now. I was born in 1968, and I grew up in a very wooded area, and there wasn't very much neighbors or traffic around in the area where I grew up. And probably about a quarter mile from my house, and was walking home from a friend's one night. I was around 6 years old, and I was always on my dark, but of course, boys, I wasn't. So I was coming along the side of the road where there's a very well-worn game trail that went down this hill, down an old road. It was pretty much grown in, but there was a very well-worn game trail that came all the way up this hill and along the side of the road where I was walking. And I heard something in the woods, like it was parallel where I was walking, and I could hear the footsteps in the woods. And when I would stop, then I would hear one more step, like it was watching me as it was walking. And when I would start walking again, it would start walking. And when I would stop, I would hear a step or two after. So it was actually looking at me, watching me. So I got to where my driveway is, and that trail turns from the road going down parallel to our old driveway and down over this hill where it was an old road. So I got in there, and I was scared, of course, and powered up how young kids do and ran up the door as fast as I could and into the house. And, of course, I told my mother. She said, oh, it was probably a deer or something. At the time, I just remember thinking, well, that wasn't a deer, but I didn't, I had no idea what it could have been. I just knew something watching me and walking along the side of the woods. So that was when I was around 7. And then, in between this time and the next thing I'm going to be talking about, there was an old boy who lived down this old military road was their drive, and the actual encounter that I'm going to be talking about, like, happened down past the end of this driveway. And the boy told me one time, don't come down here at night because there's something in the woods here. And, being a kid, I just thought, oh, he's just trying to hear something, didn't really register at the time. And in that same area, there was a waterfall deep out into the woods there. And myself and a few friends, it was actually during the wintertime, went hiking way out in the woods to go see this waterfall. And when we got there, there was a fresh deer leg, just the leg itself, laying beside the fall. And it wasn't cut. It was like pulled off, and it was fresh, like it had just happened. And there was no carcass around. It was just deer leg. And we all thought that was strange, and one of the kids kicked the water, and we watched it go over the falls, But it's just a strange thing to find like that. And another time around that area, we were walking on this other old road that wasn't in use anymore. It was behind these line of trees, and there were really just huge round prints of snow, and they seemed to be far apart, and they didn't look like footprints, so to say, but they had melted some, and there was just these huge prints, and I remember us all wondering what made these prints. So this was all basically within the same area, within probably 2-3 miles of each other. So, I must have been around 11 then.
A couple years later. Okay.
Right. But when I was, to back up a little bit here, when I was around 9, we had kind of a little farm, and my father grew 6 different kind of grapes, and we had some pears and just pretty much everything grow here in Pennsylvania. And he was eating his grapes and his plums off of the trees. So he had put these traps up. And there was one at the base of one of the plum trees and some by his grapes. And I was a country boy, obviously. It was my job to check these traps in the morning. And I knew what a raccoon smelled like. I would know if there was something in the trap before I would get to it because I could smell it. And this particular morning, I was walking down the orchard to go check the traps, and I could just smell this horrible, skunky, wild animal smell. And I remember thinking to myself, man, there must be a huge raccoon in this trap, you know? So I get down there, and a branch that was about 6 or 7 foot up on the plum tree that the trap was hooked to was just broken off and hanging just by some bark. And the chain and the trap were both gone. They were nowhere to be found.
Jeez.
And I went and told my father, and he looked at it, and I said to him, well, what do you think could have done that? And he just had a strange look on his face, and he said, oh, well, it was probably a raccoon or something. And I it was pretty, to me, I was like, well, it couldn't have reached that branch if it was in the trap, you know. And I said, oh, I'm not too sure about that, and shook his head. And I think he realized then it was something, but then probably didn't want to tell me or scare me. So.
And he didn't mention a bear. He didn't mention a bear, right? Because there are no.
No. He said he probably thought it was a raccoon, but I think he knew it wasn't. I think he probably didn't know what could have done it. He was probably a little shocked at that happening like that too. And the chain was broken and gone, and the trap was gone. And usually any animal would chew their foot off before they could break the chain and take the trap with them. So I don't know. I think one was probably eating his grapes and eating the plums and stepped in that trap. Probably pulled the chain off and probably humbled away and probably pried the thing off of its foot. I would imagine. That's,
and you don't remember seeing any blood or anything like that, do you? Or hair?
No, I don't. But I remember just the smell was still in the air.
Yeah.
There, it just this stench, and it's just a horrible, wild smell, which I'll be talking about again when we get to my actual encounter.
Okay.
And so I'm gonna head there to the encounter itself, and then there was 2 other things that happened after the actual encounter that I was going to talk about too. You think I should talk about that first, or? Okay.
Yeah, you're on a roll. I'll just go right into through the timeline. That's cool.
Okay. So this that had all happened before. See, I guess it would be 86 when I actually had my encounter, and that stuff had all happened before that. So, 2 of my friends and I and my cousin decided we were going to go camping. We talked about it, and I said, oh, well, there's this waterfall down here. You go camp here around this area, which was probably about a mile away from my home where I grew up. And we actually went down that old driveway that was the old military road, and we went out into the deep part of the woods there and found the waterfall and set up camp. And then 2 of us decided we were going to this store and go get us some food so we could cook something in the morning or then when we got back. And this is about 2 miles away, so it took us a while. We walked all the way into town and got some food and walked all the way. And by the time we got back, it was already getting dark, so we were calling to the other guys to figure out where they were, and they'd called back to us, and we finally found them. So we went and set up there and had a fire, and we're sitting around BSing, and teenage boys, what they do. So around 11 o'clock, we decided we were going to go lay down, go to bed. We built the fire up and got in the tent, and radio playing. We're just bullshitting, and we just heard this deafening scream that sounded like nothing I'd ever heard before. And it was so loud, I feel it in my chest. It actually like reverberated in your lungs. It was loud, and it had to be about 200 yards away from us. And it was that loud that you could actually feel it. And it sounded like whistling, screeching, barking, growling, and like chattering, almost language kind of chattering, but it was all at the same time and all at this really high level. And it was just frightening, to say the least. And the whole forest just went dead silent. So I turned the radio off, and we were looking at each other. Of course, our eyes were big as dinner plates. And we were just like, what the hell was that? You know, we're sitting there listening, and then we hear something come smacking through the trees and the brush, and it must have come down the one side of the hill and through the creek and up the side of the hill where we were, and up by the waterfall, and it came right past the back of the tent, and it was just stomping the ground when it came past. It was so heavy that the ground actually shook. You could feel the vibration of the ground shaking when it came past us. And I said to one of the other guys that was in the tent with us, unzip the back flap window on the tent. You know? And he just looked at me and he said, no, you do it. And I could see that he was, you know, just frightened to death. His eyes were just huge. And I was actually so scared I was shaking. And I was afraid to do it then too. And one thing I really thought about this later, I was kind of known to be fearless with all my friends. And I was just literally shaking from fright. And I just couldn't believe what was happening. So I asked him to unzip the back flap on the tent, and he wouldn't. And I was afraid to do it too. And then the smell hit us like a wave. And I'm sure if you've ever smelled like a wet deer or a raccoon or anything like that, this thing smelled 5 wet deer and a couple skunks. It was just horrible stench, and it was so bad it like burned the membrane. And so I got up enough guts. I unzipped the front of the tent a little bit, enough for me to shotgun out, and I fired into the air, and it had passed us by then, into the woods past us. So we got out, and I called into the woods and said, you know, if this is somebody messing with us, you better call out. And no answer, and the woods were still just dead silent. So we shot the trees up into the tops of the trees where it had gone. There's no answer, no movement, nothing. So I said, you know, this is your last chance. And nobody answered. So we actually shot directly into the woods, which I would never do. I grew up with guns, and I would never do it in any other circumstance. It was just that we were just deathly afraid of whatever this thing was. So then we went and sat around the fire, all with our backs to the fire, just scanning the woods for about 2 hours. And finally we decided we were not hearing anything else. I guess we're going to go back and lay down in the tent. And I guess some of the other guys probably fell asleep, but I stayed up the whole rest of the night. I was just laying there until dawn, just into the forest, hoping this thing wouldn't come back and just smash us to death. And I think that it was kind of a false charge, and it was telling us it did not want there. It wanted us to leave, and it could kill us if it wanted to. And I think that it probably was shocked when we started firing guns. I don't think that, but when it made the vocalization, for some reason I got the feeling that it could sense how afraid we were. It knew what we were thinking, and that's when it charged through the woods at us. I think it got the fright that it wanted by making this vocalization, and I think that emboldened it to come charge us. And it was just shocking hearing this thing and then feeling the ground shake and then the smell. It was just unbelievable. And sometimes I wish I would have looked out of that flat to see what it was. And then sometimes I'm glad that I didn't. So then I think that this next part that I was going to talk about, I think it was the next summer after this.
Okay. So before you get into that part,
sure.
What did you guys think it was? Like, what did they say?
Well,
at the time,
I hadn't really talked about or thought Bigfoot before, but for me it was obvious what it was. And two of the other guys that were with us won't even talk about this to this day. Like, I've mentioned it to them a couple times, and they're like silent. They don't even want to talk about it at all. So I think it's still a frightening memory for them, and which I agree.
Yeah.
So, I think we were all in agreement at the time that it was obviously a Bigfoot. There was nothing else that could move through the forest that quickly, and we could actually feel the footsteps when it came past us, and it was on 2 feet.
Was it?
I have no doubt in my mind.
Was it running, do you think, or was it walking heavy?
It wasn't running. It was just taking big, heavy stomps, and it covered that whole distance from, it had to be about 200 yards away from us on this other hill. It had to be about 10 seconds, and it was coming right past the back of the tent. So whatever it was taking huge steps, covering a lot of distance very quickly, but it didn't sound like it was running, came past us. It sounded like it was walking. And the steps were so heavy, the ground actually shook, and I believe it, and it was just something you can't really explain how frightening it is. You've had an encounter like this, and I haven't actually seen one, but I know what this was. I couldn't imagine someone seeing one that up close to them. It was within 4 or 5 feet away from us.
Yeah, I think you were better. You made the right decision to not zip down the tent.
Yeah, I think about that a lot. That if I had looked out, would have made it angry, or if it would have looked in, then and what would have happened then?
And
but
the kid that had warned you not to go down at night, was he there on this camping trip, or was that?
He was not actually. When he had told me that, I was probably around 9, 10 years old, and he was probably 16 at the time, and lived down at the bottom of this driveway, close to where this waterfall is that this happened. And I imagine they had heard it, or he had seen it, or known something was watching before. And I think he was, I know he was telling me for real, don't come down here. He was warning me not to. But at the time, I thought he was just trying to scare me or something, and never really thought about it after that until this had happened. And I didn't really place the other that happened when I was a kid until after this.
Yeah.
So it was just a strange situation. And then realizing these other things that happened were types of encounters also.
Mm-hmm. And that smell that you smelled the night when you were in the tent, do you think that was kind of similar to what you smelled with the trap?
It was, but probably 10 times stronger.
Okay.
Which is a thing I've thought about after this, that I think they have a gland that is, I don't know if you know about dogs and apes, but they have a gland that releases a pheromone. And if it's not just the stench of this furry giant creature, I think that it has a gland that releases this foul smell, probably as a warning. And it really only does that when it's angry or frightened by something. And that's just my theory on that. But I mean, it could just be that this giant furry animal that has never been cleaned, you know, and it probably eats, well, I'm sure it probably eats skunks and raccoons and whatever else it could get its hands on. And sure, that wouldn't make you smell very well. So either way, it was just a horrendous smell. I haven't smelled anything that strongly since then, and I didn't think that strongly before that, but the odor I smelled when the trap was gone that day was strong and similar to that same odor.
Okay.
So that is pretty much all I can say about that encounter.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just still unbelievable to me. But I know what it was, and it's shocking to realize it.
Yeah.
So.
And so have you kind of been following this topic, you know, since then, or do you come back to it, or?
Well, I think that I've kind of come back to it here, probably in my 30s, realizing what it was then, and that more people spoken about their sightings and encounters, and it's not something that people think you're crazy. I'm just a regular guy, and grew up in the woods. I'm a carpenter, and just have a regular life, and it's something that really happened, and it happens to other people, it's regular people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what made me realize it and want to speak about it to other people, because I know what it was that we encountered, and other people know what they're seeing, smelling, and hearing, especially if it's someone who's used to being in the forest. I was, and a lot of these guys that have run-ins are hunters or people who are always in the forest. So that's my thought.
Yeah. Did you ever tell anybody in the family about it, or did you ever hear any other stories from that area?
Well, there's a couple that I was going to talk about.
Yeah.
One person who lived up the road from us, this was before this encounter, he had one of my other friends in the neighborhood that he saw a bear looking through his basement window. And then he said when he went outside, there was nothing there. It was gone. And we all knew that there was no bears in this area. And he had told him that there was a bear, and he just kind of laughed off, thinking that the guy's just, making a story up. But the same boy that had told him that later told her sister that him and one of the high school teachers from our school. I guess the guy had asked him to come help him do some work at his farm, and they were out in the field one morning, and he saw a Sasquatch walking along the tree line in the field on this guy's farm. And my sister later asked him about it, and he admitted it in front of their class that he and this other boy had seen one early in the morning and walking along the tree line. And that was up near the same, probably within 7-8 miles of where we had our encounter.
Okay.
So, I was probably, I must have been around 11 or so then when that happened to him.
Okay.
And there was something else that happened to us that was involved in someone else's story that I found out about. But this actually happened after my initial encounter. Something else happened by our house, and then one other thing happened that was someone else's story. So I'll tell you what happened then after this encounter. My cousin, we're staying out in what we playhouse. My father was a master craftsman carpenter and built this house for my older sister when she was a kid, and it had like a burning stove in it and electricity and windows and a door and everything. It was like a real little house. So we kind of made this our bedroom for the summer. And right beside this little house, a group of pawpaw trees, which a lot of people know pawpaws are. They kind of taste like a banana and grow here and in West Virginia. So we were about ready to go to sleep, and I heard something rustling outside of the window where I had the bed right beside this window by the pawpaw trees. And I heard something rough in those trees. And then I could hear something breathing, very heavy breathing, right outside the window, within 5 feet of these pawpaw trees. And I said to my cousin, well, there's a monster out, and kind of jokingly. And I said, should I open the curtain? He was frightened already and said no, I imagine he did not want to see what it was out there, but we both hear this very loud breathing right outside the window. Then I got really frightened and I wasn't going to look out there either. And kind of laid pretty much the rest of that night. But I didn't hear any footsteps or vocalizations that night, but I just heard loud breathing and something right outside the window. I imagine it was eating pawpaws off of this tree. So that was when I was probably 17.
Okay.
So,
and it's interesting if you compare, what happened that night versus what happened the other time. It didn't scream. It didn't really intimidate
there was. Right. I think it was coming there just to feed, which we had different types of fruits, and we had a big garden. We grew corn every year, and I also remember my father saying he thought something was eating the corn because a lot of ears of corn were gone every year.
Yep.
And which deer do that, but just for whole ears to be gone just seemed strange. I didn't realize at the time, but thought about this later, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So that it came onto our property, and that the old I was talking about that paralleled our driveway would have been a perfect land. It was so well beaten, there had to be something heavy that was coming up and down this trail very frequently. It wasn't just deer making this trail this well used. I think, but it was pretty close to where our little playhouse would be, and it would have been easy for it to come right out of the woods, right over onto our property, and pretty much eat whatever kind it wanted. There was everything was growing there, so and that's what it was doing, eating some of the pawpaws, and then probably either heard me say something or could smell us, because it seemed like it was breathing, but also sniffing like it was playing. So I think maybe it was smelling at the window and could smell us. And I think back to our actual encounter, I kind of thought about this a few times too, that there's 4 teenage boys and we're all full of testosterone. And I think something that's alpha senses that and probably pisses it off. So I think that was one of the reasons that it had aimed at us and charged us. I think it was trying to show that it's the dominant alpha male here, and it could kill us if it wanted to. And I kind of thought about that later. When I heard it being by the window, I think it was sniffing and breathing like it was smelling us. And teen boys, I imagine, have a smell. I think that's what it was doing. And that's just what I had thought about later. So that's pretty much what happened that night there. And then there was one other thing that I know that was a definite vocalization. Myself and my girlfriend at the time and 2 of my other friends were different guys than the other 2 friends that were with me when we had this original encounter. We were up at the Sewickley Cemetery, and it's a really, really neat cemetery, but we were up there at night just kind of hanging, and that's kind of what you do around that area. Go hang at the cemetery, I imagine, when you're teen kids. There in the cemetery, and just kind of bullshitting, and we heard something along the edge of the woods. It made this vocalization, was like very questioning who sound, and I could imitate it for you.
Go ahead.
It was just like ooh, and like ended with this higher pitched, and it sounded like it was a questioning call, and it didn't sound like the other one did. It sounded like it was a juvenile, and that it was more of a questioning, communicating call, and it was facing towards us, like it was calling towards us, like it was trying to communicate to us. So I made that same sound back to it again, and it did it back to us, and I had done it again, and it did it back again. And myself and one of the other guys said, well, we're going to go over to the edge of the woods here and go see what it is, you know? So we got up to go, and my girlfriend at the time, she had crying because she was so frightened, and she grabbed onto our shirts and she was like, no, you guys are not going over there. And she was literally like pulling on our shirts, like would not let us go over there because she was so afraid for herself, what it would do to us, I imagine. It was just so loud, but to me, it didn't seem like it was a threatening call. It seemed more like it was a questioning communication call. And of course, I didn't think all this at that time, what I thought about later. But I just, in my own opinion, that was vocalization from what we call Sasquatch. And another guy who had been in this same cemetery, and him and some of his friends were up there that one night, and he heard something rustling through the brush along the edge of the line, and he said that he got so scared that he was standing up on his car, because whatever it was something big, big in the woods. And he said he had jumped up on top of his car because he was so frightened. Then he heard some dogs coming, and then this thing just smashing through the woods down over the hills. And these dogs along the same trail line where they had heard the sound and down over the hill. And later he had talked to one of his friends who owned these hunting dogs, and the guy told him the day before that his dogs, who are very well-trained hunting dogs, got the scent of something, and they started going crazy, so he let them go. And then he stayed out in the woods for a few hours calling them, and they didn't come back. So he went home, and he came back the next morning, and they were all beat to hell and scratched up like they had been in a war with something. And in this area, there's no bears, and I don't even think there was coyotes there then. There was some fox and deer, things like that. Just the things that I've heard and the others I've heard from this area do not sound like any deer or raccoon or that I've ever heard of. Yeah. And then I discussed that there was actually another sighting up near this same area. I think it was in 1997.
Yeah.
And that was something I didn't know about at the time, but have since looked at. That was within probably 3 to 4 miles of where we had our encounter, and probably about less than 3 miles from my home, where I grew up, where I had these previous things happen. And I think that they have a home there, or it's their ground or nursery. And I think that's, they try down and go and try and find the food they can eat and the animals they can hunt. And I think they have a certain base where they either have a cave or whatever type of little houses they make. So,
now, is that the one that we had talked about yesterday, or is that a different one? The one in 1997?
Yeah, right, that you discussed with me that it was in the same area, and that's what's the area. And
yeah,
I went and looked at that encounter where he marked, and that road where he saw that, if you that road and then turn right, follow that road and turn another right, that would be my road. So it was within 3-4 miles from my home where I grew up. And that would have been about 5 miles away from where we had our actual encounter.
Yeah. And I think in that one, the guy was on his porch or in his backyard, and he saw it cutting through his backyard. He said it was white.
Right, exactly. And I'm not sure where the other film was from, but someone else had filmed a white Sasquatch, and I think that it was up towards an area called Mount Nebo, which probably about 20 miles from there. So I don't know if I'm correct about that filming, but it definitely was supposedly filmed in Pennsylvania, the white Sasquatch. I don't know if you've seen the film.
Is that the one where the guy has a flashlight? He's like kind of walking towards the woods, and he shines it on that face real quick, and then it cuts away? Right. That one?
Right, exactly. And
okay.
Yeah, I kind of put those two together after hearing the other encounter of this guy seeing the one, and then this one that was filmed, if I'm correct, was Mount Nebo area, which is about 20 miles away from there.
Okay. Yeah, there's quite a few white reports in Pennsylvania, but that video is really good.
Yeah, I watched it a few times. And I've never seen one myself, but in my opinion, that guy filmed was a real creature. And it wasn't a mask or anything else. You could actually see the face move on it.
Yeah, I think so
and
too.
Right. And I've never seen one myself, but the encounter we had and the other couple involved things have made a true believer out of. And I was never really interested in Bigfoot, anything like that before this happened. But after this happened, I just know that this is a real creature, and it lives in the forest everywhere where there's deforested areas. And that's my true, honest to God opinion.
It's a good one. And you know what I was going to tell you? I remember when I mapped that report, the one that from 1997 that's near where your encounter happened. And I remember thinking, this is a pretty unlikely spot for one to be. I remember thinking that at the time because I was trying to figure out where it actually happened. So that when you told me that where it was, I was it kind of made me feel better and more secure about the location because you had an experience there too. Even though it seems pretty unlikely for it to be where it was, you know.
Well, I thought about that, and then thinking about the area, there's forests that go miles out there along the 79 highways, and I could probably walk from my home where I grew up there, probably that 20 miles up to Mount Nebo, with only having to cross maybe 2 roads. There is just miles and miles of forest back there. And that whole town there is very heavily forested.
Yep.
And not a lot of people living there. The homes are real close together, and everyone has big yards and forests behind their house.
Okay.
For me, it doesn't seem unlikely that I live in this area, and there's so many deer and wildlife up there. And we would have deer just walk right up to the windows of our house within 5 feet of us. There would be 12 of them standing right there. And just the whole area up there was kind of a haven for wildlife. And and where we had our encounter was pretty woods, and I could probably walk for 7 miles woods there to where I got to a place where you couldn't walk any farther. And then if you crossed over a road, there was probably another 20 miles of woods on the other side of this road.
Okay.
So more than enough forested area for a creature of this type to live in. Yeah, I would think.
Have you, let's see, just another question I had. After that happened, did you guys still go back there and hang out? Or if not, have you ever been back there, as an adult or?
Well, I was going to tell you that also. I have never gone back to that area again. And I've said I have 3 sons of my own, and I've said to them a few times I would like to take a walk down along that creek there to where the water was and go look at it. But I still haven't done it yet. And this was about 35 years ago, nearly 35 years ago, and I still haven't gone back to this area yet.
Okay.
And I would like to, but I only think I'd go back there if I was armed.
Yeah.
And I had someone else with me that was armed. I really don't think these beings are always aggressive. I think sometimes they're probably helpful or nice to humans. I think we were either in its hunting ground or its nursery. And I think it was a large male protecting its family or its hunting area and we were disturbing everything in the woods there, just having a fire, being camping, having a radio playing, as 4 teenage boys talking. And I think it was either mad that frightening off the game that it was trying to hunt, or we were in an area where it had its nursery, where its children are. And any of us would do the same. If someone's invading your home area, you want them to out of there, you know, and I think that's pretty much what it was telling us. The other way telling me when I was a kid not to come down there because there's something in the woods out. And this was within a half mile of the house from this old military road, which was his driveway. And this was actually really close to his house where this happened. And I don't think he was lying or trying to just scare me now. And I think he probably had at least an encounter or some vocalizations when he was young and was telling me, you know, don't come down here because there's something out here. And this was probably a year or two after I heard thing walking through the woods, which I kind of feel like it was stalking me or it was just curious and was watching me. And it was right after dusk. And a lot of people say they have their sightings or encounters, you know, around dusk or dawn. And I think they're a nocturnal being. They hunt and go and gather any type of can, mostly at night. And I think mostly just so they're not running into us. And opinion about that.
It's a good one. It's good. Yeah, I mean, if you do end up wanting to go back there and you want someone to go with you, you know, I would go with you if you wanted to.
I would go back there again if you would want to go. I don't think I would go there at night again, but I would go in the daytime.
Yeah.
If I did go at night, I would definitely be armed, and I would want anyone else that's with me to be armed. Not that I think, I really don't think that it wanted to kill us. I think it wanted us to know it could kill us.
Yeah.
But just in case, if you had to defend yourself, I would want to be armed.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, I would actually go back to the area again. And
okay.
If you would want to do that, we could probably make plans to do that.
Yeah, we should. We'll keep in touch on Messenger and plan it out. You know, daytime's good, you know, because you can tell it's a lot safer. We can see, and I bet you that if they are still there, that we'll be able to tell pretty easily.
Yeah, I think that I said something to that boy that told me not to go back there one time. I don't remember what the discussion was about. But I said, well, there's no caves around here. And he said, yeah, there are caves here in that area, which I never found any. We went and scouted around that far out in the forest just a couple times. The one time when we found the deer leg, another time we went close to that area. We were going to look. There's actually an Indian burial ground probably 2 or 3 miles away from this area that we were going to look at. And then this night that we were actually camping out there. And I think when my friend and I went to the store and come back, we came back down that driveway again. It was already getting dark then. I think that if it was in that area, that it probably was already aware of us coming back down there, and yelling probably either got its attention or already had it angry, and it was probably watching us until we went in the tent that because it wasn't long that we were in the tent, so we heard that vocalization. So I think it was watching us and knew that we went in before it vocalized. So, I mean, still just talking about things come back, and I still kind of get the chills. And
I can tell, yeah.
Just like my friends kind of knew I was the fearless guy my whole life growing up as a child. I'm still pretty much like that now. But whatever this thing was had me actually shaking, and I still kind of fear whatever this thing was. I still feel that fear that it put in us, and just the vocalization alone was kind of like it was a weapon. Just the way it realized, you couldn't help but be frightened by hearing this thing. And then the charge was shocking. How quickly it moved, smashing things out of the way, and how heavy it was when it passed us. Still, it's hard to believe, but the ground actually shook. You could feel the footsteps when it stomped past the tent. And it's just unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
How heavy and big this thing must have been for you to feel the vibration through the ground of its footsteps. Exactly. Yes. So that's pretty much my account of that. And it's kind of a little bit convoluted and kind of a long go about, but our actual encounter, I know myself what it was, and the guys that were with me that night agreed then what it was. The two of them won't even talk about it still to this day. So it still must be shockingly frightening for them. And just to know that there's something out there. That's cool.
It is. It definitely changes your perspective on things, especially when you know it's there and everybody else thinks you're off your rocker.
Yeah, well, that's why I didn't talk about it sometimes. I told my father about it then, and he said, "Oh, well, it was probably this or that." And I said, "Well, no, whatever this thing was, had to weigh 800 pounds or more." And he just kind of was like, "Oh, well," he knew I wasn't lying, so he didn't really say much else about it. But I told one of my sisters and her friend about it, and she said, "Oh, well, you guys were probably drunk or on drugs." And I said, "No, we weren't. We were teenage kids. We were just kind of hanging out, camping, and this really happened." And she actually in a house that was down on this driveway too, and I told her it was down in that area. She said, "Well, I never heard anything, and you're crazy." And I guess that's people's reaction. And until you actually have something happen yourself, you can't really blame them, because it's pretty unbelievable unless you have something happen yourself, and then it's real.
Yeah, I agree. Well said. Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing your story with me, and you did really good. Recounting all the details, and I think people will enjoy listening to it. And we'll keep in touch. Whenever time comes, you want to check out that spot, let me know, and we'll set up a time and go look.
All right. Well, that's good, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen.
You're welcome.
You could call me. Yeah, well, thank you, George. You could call me, and maybe a little towards the end of the summer, which something I didn't say was this is toward the end of the summer, almost fall when this happened.
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe around the same time, same area, I think.
Okay.
I don't know if they move or if they keep a home base area.
Mm-hmm.
But I would think that there's probably some sign or sight in this area.
Yeah, I bet there is too. Yeah, and that sounds like a good kind of anniversary time to go. So.
Yeah, I think it's about time.
Okay. All right, James.
All right, George. Well, thank you again, and I will talk to you soon, my friend.
Okay, I look forward to it. Okay, have a good night, James.
You too, buddy.
Okay, bye-bye.